You know them, you love them. They're our companions, our internet memes, and let's be honest, the undisputed rulers of our homes. The story of the domestic cat is one of the most incredible tales of partnership between humans and animals. So let's dive into their 10,000-year journey. I mean, it's a journey that takes us everywhere, from ancient grave sites to royal palaces, and even deep into the very code of their DNA. So how did this once wild creature become such a global phenomenon?
Okay, get this. The story starts a whopping 9,500 years ago. Yep, 9,500 years. That's how far back our relationship with cats can be traced. And to put that in perspective, that's long before the pyramids of Egypt were even built.
So where does that number come from? Well, the key piece of evidence comes from Cyprus, where archaeologists found a human grave from 7500 BCE. Buried just 40 centimeters away was an 8-month-old cat, oriented in the very same direction. Now here's the kicker. Cats aren't native to the island. This tells us humans were already taming them and bringing them along for the ride, most likely as cherished companions.
So from that very first friendship, the cat's role in human society took some pretty dramatic turns. Seriously, depending on where and when you lived, a cat could be seen as a divine being, a simple pest killer, or even a symbol of evil.
And speaking of divine, no culture revered cats more than the ancient Egyptians. They called them Mao and saw them as sacred animals, connected to goddesses like Isis and the famous cat-headed Bastet. Killing a cat was absolutely forbidden, and when a family cat died, the whole household would mourn by shaving their eyebrows. They even mummified their cats, just like they did for people. Incredible, right? But this reverence wasn't exactly universal, not at all. In ancient Greece and Rome, for instance, cats were pretty rare. If you wanted to get rid of rodents, you got a weasel or a ferret. For them, the Egyptians' deep affection for their cats, which were so different from the wild cats they knew, was just astonishing.
By the early Middle Ages, though, a more personal, companionable view starts to emerge. This quote comes from a 9th-century Irish poem called Pangur Bán, and it was written by a monk. He beautifully compares his own scholarly work to his cat's happy pursuit of mice, and it just shows this simple, everyday friendship.
The cat's symbolic meaning was truly all over the map. For the Vikings, they pulled the goddess Freyr's chariot. Pretty cool. But elsewhere in medieval Europe, especially black cats, they got linked with witches and misfortune. In stark contrast, cats have always been considered good luck in Russia, and they're the only animals allowed inside Orthodox temples. And in Islam, cats are highly respected and revered.
So beyond their roles as gods or hunters, there came a time when cats were appreciated for something else entirely: their beauty. They became living, breathing works of art.
This idea really hit its peak in ancient Siam, which is modern-day Thailand. They created these beautiful manuscripts called the Tamra Mao, or cat book poems. Now, these weren't just about cat care, oh no. They were illustrated guides to auspicious or lucky cat breeds, and they cataloged them with the same care you'd give to, like, royal elephants.
And the language inside was just stunning. They weren't just describing fur color. One cat breed was said to have a body colored as a conch shell, while another's eyes were praised for being like dewdrops on a lotus. It was a true celebration of feline beauty.
This artistic appreciation had a real-world impact, too. One of the breeds featured in the Tamra Mao was the Wishen Mat, the classic Siamese. These cats were so valued that Siam's King Rama V actually gave them as diplomatic gifts. And in 1878, one of them, a cat named Siam, arrived at the White House for President Hayes, becoming the first of its kind in America.
So, for centuries, this was the story we knew from history and art. But recently, science has stepped in, and now the cat's own DNA is telling us a story that confirms this incredible journey. This phylogenetic tree you're looking at, well, it's basically the cat's global family history. By tracing the DNA of over 1,100 cats worldwide, geneticists confirmed that the journey started right there in the Mediterranean basin. From that point, as you can see, cats spread out, forming 4 major genetic groups, one in the Mediterranean, one in Europe and the Americas, one in Asia, and one in Africa. But genetics also reveals the cost of that aesthetic selection we saw back in the Tamra Mao. This chart compares genetic diversity, a measure of a healthy gene pool, between a random-bred cat population from Turkey and a purebred Singapora. And just look at that difference. The random-bred cats have a high diversity score of 0.76, while the purebreds are all the way down to 0.38. This shows that centuries of breeding for specific looks has significantly narrowed their gene pool.
Okay, so let's bring this story right back home and look at the amazing biological tool that every single cat uses to navigate our modern world, something you can see every single day. Of course, we're talking about whiskers. Their scientific name is vibrissae, which comes from the Latin word vibrio, meaning to vibrate. And that's exactly what they do. They aren't just thick hairs. Their follicles are packed with nerves and blood vessels, making them as sensitive as a human's fingertips. A cat essentially touches the world with its face.
Whiskers are a true multi-tool. First, they act as a radar, detecting tiny shifts in air currents that bounce off objects, which allows a cat to see in the dark. They're also body balancers. Special sensory organs at the base send messages to the brain about body position, which is a big part of why cats almost always land on their feet. And finally, they're protectors, triggering a blink reflex to keep even tiny specks of dust out of their eyes.
This just highlights how important whiskers are. They're not just a facial feature, they are a primary sense. Think about this. Nearly 40% of a cat's sensory brain power is dedicated to processing information from its whiskers. They occupy an incredible amount of valuable neurological real estate.
And that brings us to our final thought. After a 10,000-year journey from the Fertile Crescent all the way to our living rooms, a journey where they became our gods, our companions, and our art, it really makes you wonder, did we choose to domesticate the cat, or with their irresistible charm and amazing adaptability, did they somehow manage to domesticate us?